I'm often asked what cameras do I use and what are the settings. So let's just have a look at see where I put the cameras to start with. I used to run 5 cameras, but now I'm down to 3. So the first camera I have is right up top here. This is right up the start gate. That obviously catches the cars when they take off. And then I used to have another one sitting at the end here, around about sort of where my finger is, sort of pointing back towards that way. And then the other one I used to have set up right in this corner in that GoPro mount, and that would catch the cars swinging around the corner. And then the very last one that I have sort of mounted on the track is this one here, and that picks up the cars as they come past the finish line. I found having more than 3 cameras, it's a lot more editing, and also it's only a 4-second track, so in real time the cars, it takes 4 seconds from top to bottom, so it's pointless having 5 cameras. I now just run 3 cameras. Tracking the cars from top to bottom, I use a gimbal. Now the gimbal that I use is called a Tech G6. It's pretty inexpensive. I think I bought this for $160 2 years ago or something. I also have another Hero GoPro 7 Black on this as well. And I reckon let's get into the settings that I use across all the cameras. This camera we're looking at here, this one actually goes on the start gate right up the top. It is a GoPro Hero 7 Black. So let's get into the settings. You just click this little thing here and that brings you into the video settings. Now I shoot high def, 1920 by 1080, and I shoot at 100 frames a second. I don't shoot 4K or 2.7K. I shoot 1920 at 1080 high definition. And I also shoot at 100 frames a second. If you live in America, you would shoot 1920 at 1080 at 120 frames a second. The reason we do this is to do with the electricity. We're on 50 Hertz and you're on 60 Hertz if from the States. Let's have a look at these settings. The stabilization is off when the camera is mounted on around the track. If you're using a GoPro on any gimbal, turn stabilization on when you use your gimbal. Turn it off when the camera is just around the track sitting on a mount or something. You do not want stabilization on when the camera is stationary. It'll muck up your footage. Right alongside the stabilization is ProTune. Just turn it on, do yourself a favor. Your footage will come out great. This next setting is make or break. This will really determine how your footage plays back at a slower speed. Because we shoot at 100 frames a second, we need to have our shutter at 200. Just think double. When you see shutter, just put it at double. So for Australia, if you shoot at 100 frames a second, put it on 200. If you're in America and you shoot at 120 frames a second, what do? You go to 240. You have to do this. The reason we have the shutter set like that, it's all to do with playback when we go to edit. Now, white balance, I have it set at 5,000 Kelvin. It's all to do with my lights. The next 2 settings are crucial for my setup. This is ISO. I have my ISO minimum set at 800 and my ISO max set at 800. Now, if you don't know about ISO, you really need to get on YouTube and sort of find someone that's talking about ISO. It's a bit too long for me to go into it here. ISO settings are all to do with gain and how much the camera will put more light onto the sensor. The more ISO or the higher the number, the noisier your footage will be. I have these set at 800 because of my lighting setup in the studio. Now in the studio, I'm running 1, 2, 3, 4 light bulbs there. They're 85 watters and they're just hanging down from the ceiling. And I've also got 2 fluoros up top here. These are all rated at 5,000 Kelvin, so the lighting is all the same. I do need more lighting into the studio. You think this would be enough, but it's actually not. Back to GoPro settings. Sharpness, set it at medium. Don't set it high. You will destroy your footage. And also the color I have set on GoPro and all the audio settings down below. Just leave it as it is. Another setting, or another important setting for me that is right up the top here. See where it says linear? Now this camera here, this is the start gate camera. When you use linear, it sort of crops into the sensor a bit. It's not as wide, so I use that at the start gate. And all other cameras around the track, the gimbal and the finish line, I go to wide. Gives a nice wide view. You could use super wide, but I find it's too wide and too distorted. So yeah, there you go. That's the settings on the GoPro. Why do I use GoPros? There's one reason, and that is the smaller sensor. You need a smaller sensor for this particular type of program because you want everything in focus. If you start using a mirrorless camera like your Sonys or your Panasonics or whatever, a lot of those have larger sensors and it just doesn't work for chasing cars around these tiny tracks. I hope that's given you some ideas for your future track development and video production. It's pretty easy, just follow these settings, and with good lighting, you're really going to have a great video production. Just remember that ISO setting. You know, you might have to go, to 400 both high and low. Don't go over 1600 ISO, and I really highly recommend 400 being the tops, but 800 will be okay. The next thing we need to speak about briefly, and I mean really quickly, is how do you get this nice, smooth, slow motion when you're editing the footage. This is really another video on itself, but I'm going to quickly just touch on it. When you bring this footage into your NLE, your video editor, you need to set up a sequence or a project. I use Final Cut Pro. Because I'm based in Australia, my project will be at 25 frames a second or 50 frames a second. I generally use 25 frames a second. If you're in the States, your project will be 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second. Going back to the 25 frames a second for the Aussies, for me, what I do is I bring the footage in and I slow it down by 50%. So what you're seeing here is the normal speed. Now I'm going to slow it down to 50%. Now I'm going to slow it down to 25%, and that will give us that nice smooth motion. I only go to 25% when I do replays. The rest of the program, I slow everything down by 50%. I hope that's answered some of your questions in regards to cameras around Mount Western Raceway. It's pretty basic, just follow those rules and you shouldn't have any issues. Just remember where you live. Are you in Australia, or are you in England, or are you in the States? So thanks again for watching, guys, and catch you later.